hard on people when we don't know their context. If we don't, I think I mentioned this Wednesday night in the men's class, and bears repeating again. A lot of times we say things like, if I were them, I would have. And what we need is, I would have done something different. We would have, well, if I were them, I would have just done that. And it's amazing what that person did. But if I were them, you know, because I am fantastic, I would have done something completely different. Now, the problem with that is that if you probably wouldn't if you were them. Like if you had their parents and grew up where they grew up and had their sisters and brothers and in the same birth order and went to school where they went to school and had the same friends they had, you probably wouldn't do anything different than them. See, when you know somebody's context or know somebody's surroundings, it's a lot easier to have a little grace. Give them a little credit. They're doing maybe not the best they can, but they're doing what they know how. Sometimes we're pretty hard on the people in the Bible. It's amazing how we call the Israelites whiners. Oh, they got out in the wilderness and they whined because they were hungry, thirsty, having to fight battles. Can't believe those whiners. I mean, sometimes my cell phone takes blurry pictures, and that frustrates me, but those guys were whiners. Kind of hard on them. Thomas, oh, a doubter. He didn't believe that the guy who died 2 days ago wasn't dead anymore. Doubter, Thomas. We're just hard on these people. And we sit in our knowing. We know what's going to happen. We know the Bible. We know that Jesus raised from the dead. Excuse me. We know He raised from the dead. We know all the things that happened. And so we don't understand where they're coming from. And so we say things, well, if I were them, I wouldn't have ran off. I would have stood next to Jesus. You've never seen a crucifixion, have you? They had. And it's not something you want to go through. So we are starting a sermon series on Elijah. Before we talk about Elijah, I want to talk about the bad guys in this story and why the bad guys were understandably bad. I want you to connect with the bad guys, because if you connect with Elijah, you're probably missing the point of the story. Elijah was a prophet. Thou art not. So, let's talk about some of these guys. First off, we're going to have to do a little demonstration. Plus, you're not going to have to get up. But the kingdom of Israel, we'll call you the kingdom of Israel because I've got no one else to work with. Kingdom of Israel had three kings as a united kingdom. They had Saul, who they picked because he was taller. Horrible reason to pick a king. David, who God anointed and God put in place. And then Solomon, who was the only man to ever get published about how women should act when he had 700 wives and 300 ladies just hanging out. So David was really their only good king. Solomon was an okay king, but the biblical commentary on Solomon is that he was not. And that Solomon's actions actually led to Solomon's son. Solomon's son was named Rehoboam, and a guy named Jeroboam. Just close your eyes for a second. Yeah, you just gotta watch it. You never know what I'll do. Not sitting on the front row anymore. That works. Okay. So Rehoboam and Jeroboam divided the kingdom. So Rehoboam, Solomon's son, got the southern third, really. So this is you guys. This actually works because that's north, that's south. So the southern third, and then Jeroboam got the northern 2/3 of the kingdom. and they split them up just right here. Now, Rehoboam wasn't great, just like Solomon wasn't great, but he was a little more not great than Solomon. And it got worse. And this story isn't really what we're concerned about. Elijah had a lot to do with this group and the kings of this group. Now, Jeroboam was a mess. Jeroboam set up all sorts of idols and all sorts of worship places for other gods called Asherah. They were the god wasn't really Asherah, it was just a way of connecting with the god Baal, which we'll talk about in just a second. So Jeroboam was a bad king. Every other king from here on out, they say, all right, he continued in the ways of Jeroboam. When you want to say that guy was bad, they'll say he continued in the ways of Jeroboam. Jeroboam was a king for 22 years. So, bad king, 22 years. Now, depending on who you talk to, well, actually everyone you talk to will say that we've had bad leaders in the past, or in the present, or we will in the future. Now, in the United States. But at the most, someone who's a bad leader can only reign in our country for 10 years. That's the maximum. You know, if you're a vice president 2 years into a term and the president dies, you get 2 years and then you can have 2 more full terms. That's the rule. So the most you can reign is 10 years. And if you don't do well, there's a chance you'll get booted out of office. But this guy was just king. 22 years. He was king, a bad king, and influenced the people. Bless you. Now, his son, Nadab, was king for 2 years. And this is usually what happens. You have a bad king who reigns for a good amount of time. His son comes in and someone says, we're not doing this again. 2 years in, Nadab is taken out by this man. Elah. Oh no, Baasha. I'm sorry. Nadab is taken out by Baasha. Baasha reigns for 24 years, and he wasn't that great either. God said, hey, I put you in place. I let you take out Nadab, but you're not doing good either. And it says he continued in the sins of Jeroboam. We'll get to those sins in just a little bit. Now Baasha was succeeded by his son Elah. Elah reigned for 2 years, and then he was killed by a man named Zimri. And this is my favorite part. Zimri reigned for 7 days. I'm the king! And then someone took him out. See, Elah wasn't that. People liked Elah. The ruler of the army liked Elah. And so whenever Zimri took out Elah, the ruler of the army said, let's go find Zimri. And so they went and found Zimri. And Omri, the leader of the army, took him out. Omri reigned for 12 years, and then his son, who now you've heard of, Ahab, took over. Ahab is the king when our story takes place. Ahab was a bad king. It actually now jumps. The story has been saying he continued in the sins of Jeroboam. But this guy, it says, he was worse. He was worse. Ahab was a bad king. Look at this. 1 Kings 16 says, Ahab, son of Omri, did more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He not only considered it trivial to commit the sins of Jeroboam, son of Nebat, but he also married Jezebel, daughter of Ethbaal, king of the Sidonians, and began to serve Baal. I'm going to say Baal because that's what we've always said. If you want to be precise, it's pronounced Baal. But we're going to say Baal because that's just what you've heard, and I just don't want to have to deal with the olive. And began to serve Baal and worship him. I just told a Hebrew joke and y'all laughed. Y'all are smart or y'all just like me. They began to serve Baal and worship him. Alright, the name The name Jezebel pops up here, and so we know Ahab, not just as Ahab, it wasn't just Ahab ruling, but it was Ahab and Jezebel. Look what he did with Jezebel. He set up an altar for Baal in the temple of Baal that he built in Samaria. Ahab also made an Asherah pole and did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all the kings before him. He was the worst one. And he set up a temple and an altar to this god Baal. And we would look at this and we'd say, guys, what are you doing? The God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob led you out of Egypt. He rescued you from Egypt. He gave you this land. Just not a long time ago, He gave you this land. He has taken care of you. He's won battles for you. And you get in, settle in the land, and all of a sudden you're worshiping this other God. We'd say, that's crazy. If I were them, I would stay true to God. One of Ahab's problems was that he married Jezebel, and that they ruled. Now Jezebel in our culture, when you say she's a Jezebel, it probably means she's wearing shorty shorts. It has more to do with calling somebody Jezebel. Has more to do with them being promiscuous than anything else. Jezebel's problem was not that she was promiscuous. It's that her dad was a priest in the temple of Baal. And she brought this mindset, although it existed a little bit, but she brought it full force into the kingship of Israel. And here's why it was so easy. And this is why you shouldn't judge the kings of Israel. In God's system, when God rules and you're a king who serves the people. When God rules, the king, the rich, help take care of the poor. The wheat is left, the grapes are left on the edge of the vineyards and of the crops, so that the poor, the powerless, the widows, the orphans, the aliens could come by and have some free food. When God rules, you don't charge interest on loans. And then every, about 50 years or so, you forgive debts. Just completely. When God rules, there is justice for those who are hurting. But in Baal's system, the king gets to have whatever in the world he wants. Remember when Ahab wanted Naboth's vineyard? And he goes and he says, hey, can I have it? And the guy from Naboth says, no. No, you can't. And Jezebel says, you're the king, just take it. That's Baal. That's his system. That's how Baal works. Now here's what's also interesting about Baal. Baal is the god of crops. He's the God that sends rain to help the crops grow. Alright, so you're a group of people worshiping Yahweh or Jehovah or just the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. You're worshiping this God because he brought you out of Egypt. That God was seen as a God of war. God can do that thing really well. We know that. And so that they experienced God setting them free. And he brought them up out of Egypt. They marched around Jericho 13 times and the city went to the ground. There's no denying that God can handle a war. They get into this new land and it's beautiful. Just green valleys, just great crops. It's beautiful, and they walk in and the residents there, they say, how in the world do you have such beautiful land? And they say, well, it's because of a God. Baal is the God of agriculture, not a God of war. And so the Israelites, understanding, they started to think, well, of course, we've got a God of war over here who helped us get here. And now that we're here, we're going to have to pray to this other God, Baal, to help us get crops. And in their day, that's just a super common thing to do. They came out of Egypt. There's a God for everything. There's a God for cats. It really is. I'm not making a joke. There's God for everything. And so they're used to God being gods for everything. So they got a God of war who rescued them, and now they come up and they, well, gods of war can't handle crops. They need a crop god. And so they started worshiping this other god. Chances are, if you were them, you would have done the exact same thing. You're not better. I'm not better. You might be. I'm not. We're all products of from where we came, from how we were raised. And they were raised a certain way that led them to worship Baal. It just made sense for them. It wasn't a huge jump for them to worship another god when they needed something different. So Ahab and Jezebel, along with their worship of this false god Baal, angered God. And then out of nowhere, it seems, comes a man named Elijah. Elijah just means God's man. He represents God. Actually, it means Yahweh's man. It means Yahweh is God. Sorry, Hebrew just, I was like, that doesn't make sense. It means Yahweh is God. It means He is in control. And His message is not, this God's the best. It's, this God is the only God. And He does everything you need Him to do. Look at His first pronouncement. Knowing that Baal is the god of crops and the god of rain, and then they thought this God was a god of war and He can't really do the crop thing. Look what Elijah's first words are. Now Elijah the Tishbite from Tishbe in Gilead said to Ahab, "As the Lord, the God of Israel, lives, whom I serve, there will be neither dew nor rain in the next few years, except at my word." So God sends His man to these people who are worshiping the crop god, and He says, you think Baal has control? You think Baal is in charge? I'm going to take away the one thing you think he does best. I don't care how many times you pray to Baal, or worship Baal, or offer sacrifices to the crop god, to the rain god. Yahweh, the God of Israel, whom I serve, as surely as He lives, and He does indeed live, as surely as He lives, we're going to make that God powerless. See, this is the way we often think. We think that God can do some things, and so we'll give Him rule in some areas of our life. He can do certain things really well. When I need some sins forgiven, He can handle that. When I need a prayer answered, He can handle that, we think. So we know God can do some things pretty well. But there's other areas of our life that we would really like to give control to someone else. We would really like, listen, our marriage could really use Oprah's help. Our finances could really use this person's help. We will bow down at the throne of anyone who we believe can help us. We will bow down at the throne of greed because we know that as long as I want, as long as I'm looking out for number one, for those of you who don't speak English, numero uno. as long as I'm looking out for this guy, then I'm not nervous. I'm not worried. My grandmother was a worrier. It's her only flaw. She probably loved her dog a little too much. She's in heaven, she'd tell you that. But she would worry, and she would say, my dad, she'd be talking to my dad. My dad would say, we're going to Texarkana Saturday night. We're going to go watch a movie. Well, it's going to be dark. Dad would say, well, we have headlights. Like, we rely on certain things to get us through, certain things to take care of us. But in the end, the thing that keeps me from worry is that God is in control. No, and don't mishear me. I'm not saying that because God's in control, I'm going to be free from pain. That's ridiculous. But I know that because Jesus is King, even if I go to Texarkana and see a movie, or on the way back get hit by an 18-wheeler and die, God's still God. His rule is bigger than anything I can be afraid of, anything that I can worry about. And so when I worship other things, it's often for the same reason that the people of Israel worshiped Baal. It's because I believe those things can help me out in this area a little bit better than God can. That if I acknowledge those things, give those things power in my life, I believe they're more powerful. And so when I worry, I'm worshiping my fear. We do that a lot. We give power to something that doesn't deserve power, and God can come into our lives. And if we let it, and He'll say, let me have control of that, and you'll see how much power I have. Let me rule for you, and you will see. You think that thing has power? Give me that, I'll show you the power. And Elijah does this time and time again in the story. His story is set against the backdrop of people who are scared to death that if they don't worship the right God or do the right thing, then God's going to, or things aren't going to go their way. And so these people have been worshiping Baal for 100 years, centuries. They've been worshiping Baal, and they have a beautiful crop, so we might as well worship Baal too. We've been doing it a certain way our whole life, so we might as well do that too. We can no longer, as Christians, afford to be worshiping other gods. The world sees us and they see our divided selves. They see that we worship our own correctness. Have you caught that one sometimes? Man, I've got it right. Oh, you do? Yes. That's why God gives me glory. Huh? How about that? I think it's probably a little more complicated than that. In the end, you don't have it right. You really don't. I don't. I study my Bible for a living. And I haven't got it all right yet. I doubt you do. I haven't met anyone who's got it right. So why in the world would we worship something that doesn't have power? Why in the world would we give power to something that doesn't deserve it? Something just made up. See, if God is truly God, then He rules over everything. And God doesn't just affect your church attendance. God doesn't just affect what goes on in this place, but in more ways than what He affects here. He affects what goes on in your homes. He affects what goes on at your job. He can affect what He control. He can affect how much you worry. He can affect how much you just frivolously really spend money. I'm a professional speaker. He can affect everything you've got going. Everything. Now, I think a lot of times the traps we fall into, the problems we fall into, is because we're giving power to things that don't deserve power. How many of you, don't raise your hand because it'll be too many and it's just embarrassing. It's embarrassing that this affects me too. How many of you give the news too much power in your life? You'll watch, well, I'm not going to name any of them because they're all bad and I don't want you to say them. I mean, you do understand a 24-hour news cycle is ridiculous. Because you're gonna have periods of time where they've got to manufacture ratings. So they're gonna stir up stuff. It's counterproductive. If the things you're watching, the news or the radio that you're listening to, is making you afraid or making you feel right about everything you think, turn it off. Because neither place is a holy place. Don't give power to things that don't deserve power. Don't give glory to things that don't deserve glory. I say that last one for the end because I want you to finally realize we wrestle with the same things that the people who Elijah are speaking to wrestles. We will read this story because we don't worship Baal. We'll say, well, I'm connecting with Elijah in this story, and that is a mistake. Elijah connects with God. And if you can find in your life how you can connect with the people who are wrestling with the same things the Israelites are wrestling with, you can connect with that, then Elijah will speak to you too. His first message is the things you think have power don't have power. They don't. Got in a little bit of trouble, not a whole lot. I'm congenial enough that when I do get in trouble, it's not a whole lot. But I was around election time, I guess 4 years ago. There was a lot of doomsday stuff. Oh, if this happens, then it's the end. Here it's the end. And they said, the church is going to be persecuted. The church, and I said, bring it on. I don't care. Notice I said I got in trouble for saying this, and here I am saying it again. I don't care who thinks they can persecute this place, because this place is established on something far bigger than anybody's got going in this country. When the kingdom of God comes, the stars and stripes will fall. They won't wave that flag. So persecute away. Actually, the church grew the most when it's persecuted. If you care about church growth, then let it come. Because I won't give power to people who don't deserve it. I won't give rule to people who haven't earned it. And the only one, in my opinion, who has earned kingship is the one who beat death for you and for me. Now, do I respect the authorities? Of course. Of course I do. Peter talks about that, but they haven't. Peter's words are respect them because who put them in place? God. And apparently, He is so powerful, He puts people in place. I am not ashamed of the God who I worship, because I believe He is all powerful and that no one else is worthy of our worship. No one else is worthy of our fear. No one else is worthy of the things that we worry. God alone is capable. So invite Him into your life. Invite Him into your everyday, not just your Sunday, but your every day. A prayerful person is rarely a worrier. You just don't have time. When I begin my day acknowledging that the Father in heaven, holy is your name, when I begin my day acknowledging that, it's just hard to worry about, be afraid of anything. Christians should not be chickens. Blessed with the gift of flight, but scared to get off the ground. With all the tools needed to embrace God's promise, to embrace that Jesus is King, to embrace the goodness of our Lord. But we've given way too many other things power. Now we're scared to death of those things. You think Baal controls the rain? I'll show you who controls the rain. You think the economy controls your life? I'll show you who controls your life. Back where the economy really did hit, it was hurting for a while. It still is hurting, but Rachel and I, like everything, I would say, this door is squeaky. Yeah, in this economy, you would think. Like everything became this economy. We kind of took it and made fun of it. Because really, it's not that powerful. It's not worth worshiping. The only thing worth worshiping is God. If you've been worshiping something or been giving power to something that's just eating you up, and you need a man of God or you need God's presence to come in and say, let me break this up. Let me show you who's in control. And you need to invite God's control over those things in your life today. Whether you want to come forward and pray, or maybe you've never actually invited God's control over your whole life. You've never accepted Him as King and Savior. You want to be united with Him. Today's the day to do that too. If you've been given power to things that don't deserve power, Elijah would tell you, Jesus would tell you, repent, turn away from that, because those things aren't that powerful. Only God is worthy of our fear. Only God is worthy of our respect. Only God is worthy of our worship. And only God is King. Give Him, even if all you do in response to this sermon is to stand up and sing, then by all means,